Thomas Edison says that he has not failed 10,000 times. He's found 10,000 ways that aren't going to work for a light bulb. So each of those failures were actually little tiny successes in ruling out and getting little tiny no's, in ruling out a line of inquiry. And that's, I actually, I just published a paper with one of my colleagues about creativity, about teaching creativity. And we found, after we did an experiment in a number of classes, we found that removing the fear of failure has a significant positive effect on student creativity. So if we can figure out a way to get rid of that fear, at least at times, not always, sometimes you got to be afraid of failing, but at least when you're trying to be creative, we can enhance your creativity. And that's kind of my goal in my class, is to enhance creativity. So before we get to the failure part, I want to give you a quick little primer on creativity itself, just to kind of set the stage. Creativity actually consists of two equally important activities. My advanced slide thing is failing. There we go. Equally important activities. The first is divergent thinking. And in divergent thinking, you come up with a lot of different options, right? And you come up with as many as you can. That's the goal. But then the second part is convergent thinking. And in convergent thinking, you take all those options and you figure out the one or the two or three or whatever that are gonna be most useful to you, or most implementable or most practical, or any of those things. Both of these are really important, both divergent and convergent. Our definition of creativity, you can imagine that it's actually very difficult to define. And I spend a lot of time figuring out what the definition is in class. We're going to skip that and kind of skip to the nutshell of it. And that is, creativity are things, coming up with things that are new, number one, and useful. There's some debate over the useful, about whether that's the right term, whether it's useful or meaningful or relevant, but there's always this second thing. It's not just original. It has to be, there's a second part to it. The new part comes from the divergent thinking. The useful part comes from the convergent thinking. So both of them are really important. There's a good metaphor. There's a book called Creativity Rising. And I have a whole book list if anybody's interested in some good books. I can send that to you. But the book called Creativity Rising talks about a metaphor. And the metaphor is that divergent thinking is the gas pedal in a car, and convergent thinking is the brake pedal in the car. So divergent and convergent. Who wants to get into a car that only has a gas pedal? Hopefully nobody. Who wants to get into a car that only has a brake pedal? Hopefully nobody. So you got to have both. But the metaphor comes in is, it's not, nobody wants to get into a car and press the gas and the brake at the same time. That doesn't get you anywhere. What you want to do is press the gas for as long as possible until you get close to your destination, and then you start pressing the brake pedal. So it's no good to try and diverge and converge at the same time. It's much better in creativity to diverge first and then converge, and make a real separation between those. The thing is, we are all really, really, really good at convergent thinking. All education has trained us to converge, to figure out the one right answer that's going to get you to do well on a test, the one right answer that is going to get your boss to pat you on the back, the one right answer. You figure out that one right answer and you run with it. And you don't take time to think about what might the other right answers be. There might be lots of right answers. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But like, years of standardized testing and things like that has trained us to be really good at convergent thinking. I often go off on a rant about standardized testing. I'll just say that, in my opinion, standardized testing is the worst thing to happen to education since the invention of the television. So standardized testing bad. I won't go off on that rant, but in lieu of that rant, I am going to sing you a song. I'm not singing you this song because I think I'm a good singer, because as you'll see, I'm not. But it's a song that I think really makes this point. So I sing it. It's a song by old American folk singer named Harry Chapin. I don't know if anybody remembers him. His most famous song is Cats in the Cradle, but he has lots of other good songs. So here's the song. Okay, ready? Remember, I'm not claiming I'm a good singer. So many colors in a rainbow, so many colors in the morning sun, so many colors in a flower, and I see everyone. Flowers are red, my son, green leaves are green. No need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen. So first, I hear my wife outside the door, and I'm sure she's snickering. So I'm talking to her right now. Shut up. Second, that song is about a little boy who goes to school, and he's very creative, and he's drawing pictures of, flowers that are purple and leaves that are yellow or whatever. And a teacher comes up to him and says, no, flowers are red, green leaves are green. That's the way it is. And by the end of the song, he goes to another school and he's lost all his creativity. And I think that kind of sums up why we're all very good at convergent thinking, making only one choice. Okay. All right. So I focus on divergent thinking because I think our students get enough of the convergent thinking. So for focusing on the left part of this, that doesn't mean that the right part is unimportant. It's really important for the useful part of creativity, but focusing on the left. And one of the biggest barriers to divergent thinking is, guess what? Fear of failure. Fear of failure is a part of the voice of judgment. The voice of judgment is that little voice in your head that says, don't say that. Don't put that out there. And the voice of judgment has lots and lots of reasons for saying that. This is a nice little picture of the voice of judgment. So I'm sure you've had this experience where you're in a meeting and you come up with an idea, and the voice of judgment, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what the voice of judgment says. The voice of judgment in your head says, no, don't say that idea. And it could have lots of reasons. The voice of judgment that I struggle with the most is the voice that says, wait, no, you've probably overlooked something. So if you say that, you're going to look stupid. That's my personal voice of judgment. So then I don't say this. And then somebody else says the exact same thing I was going to say. And everyone goes, yes, great idea. And then I sit there going, oh, that could have been me, right? So that's the voice of judgment. And that's what we're struggling against. And most of the voice of judgment comes from fear. So the fear might be, this idea isn't creative enough. It might be, it's unoriginal. Somebody else already said it. It might be, this idea is just wrong. It's not going to work. It could be, this idea isn't feasible. It's not practical. There's lots of different voices of judgment. There's another book on my book list called The Creative Habit by Twyla Tharp. And if you don't know Twyla Tharp, she's a world-class choreographer. And she's really good and clearly very creative. She devotes an entire chapter to her voice of judgment. She doesn't call it a voice of judgment, but that's what she's talking about, is that little voice in her head, Twyla Tharp's head, that says, don't say this idea. But most of the voice of judgment comes down to this thing about fear. So in order to think divergently, we really need to get past that fear, right? And then recognize that when we get to step 2, the convergent thinking, that's when we can bring the fear back and say, all right, now, is it feasible? Is it implementable? Is it creative? All those questions can come back, but don't put the brakes on before you get to that step. So if there are ways to get rid of that fear while you're divergent thinking, we can do that, okay? So what I want to do now is take a quick I'm going to give you a little test. Bet you didn't know this was coming, did you? Okay, little test. Here's the test, and Emily and Bethany are going to deploy a little poll. This is an actual standardized test question from the SAT. Tell me what you think is the right answer. Everyone pick one. There we go. All right, let's see. So if you're taking the SAT, the question, the answer that you're going to get credit for, if you answered it, is E. So that is the right answer. However, if you look at the rest of these answers, you can make an argument for each and every one of them. So those of you that didn't answer E, don't feel bad. That's kind of the point, that any of these you could argue for. So the right answer is E. But if you're trying to be creative, any of these would work. We could argue for any of them. So there is not only, there is right answer, but there's right answers. There's more than one right answer. And in this case, getting the wrong answer here, probably not a big deal. So feel free to get to think of what might be the second right answer, the third right answer. There's another book, I keep talking about these books, but there's another book called The Whack on the Side of the Head. And it has a whole chapter devoted to the second right answer. And the second right answer is a real powerful part of being creative and getting over the fear of not. So if you didn't put E, there's no consequence to that. So what? So try some of the other things. I mean, it's kind of a contrived example with this, but look for second right answers. There's another good example here, and I'm going to stop sharing for a second so I can start sharing on my iPad. So give me a minute. All right. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to, I'm going to ask you a question. Let me close this so I can see what's happening. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to either in the chat or even just unmute and shout out the answer. Okay. For the first question, just shout out what is the right answer. Okay. So what is half of 8?
4.
4. Obviously, it's 4. So half of 8 is 4. Okay. That's the right answer. And if you're looking for the single right answer, you're not trying to be creative, that's the answer you should put down. If you're in a situation where there are big consequences to being wrong, where you're not particularly looking for creativity, if you're doing your taxes and you have to figure out what half of 8 is, you should definitely write 4. Okay, that's the right answer. But if you're trying to be creative, which is an entirely different matter, what are the consequences to getting this question wrong? If I'm asking you to be creative here, what is half of 8? What are some other answers you might have? And why? Tell me. Any ideas?
0.
What? Okay, good. 0. Why is 0 half of 8?
Because if you put another 0 on top of it, it makes the letter 8, or number 8.
Right. So if I erase part of this, whoop, it's 0. So half of 8 is 0. What are some other possibilities?
Still eating.
E.
E. Right? Because, well, I didn't really draw that well, but you get the idea. Okay. Half of 8 is E. Any others?
Still
Three.
eating.
3. 3 is half of 8. So at the dinner table tonight, you could say, oh, guess what I learned? 3 is actually half of 8. And people look at you like you're insane. But that's another valid answer. It's a second right answer if you think creatively about it. Others, there's lots of these. So we could do this for days. And I'll just get a couple more, then we'll move on. But
Still
any
eating.
others? Say that again.
Still eating. So you haven't.
Oh, half of 8. Got it. That's a new one. Good one.
That's
Yes.
good.
So half of 8 is eating. Oh, I'm going to use that. Excellent.
How about equal?
Equal. Tell me why equal.
Half of 8 is 4, and 4 and 4 is the equal.
Oh, okay. So 4 and 4. Half of 8 is equal. All right. Works for me.
EI and half of the letter G.
I love it. EIJ. And then the other half is that. Okay. One of my favorites is half of 8 is Al. What? And that it goes with 8, ATE. So then the other half is dash E. Okay, and we could, there's also half of 8 is M, 8 on its side, half of that. Half of 8 is W for the other reason. And then half of 8 is infinity, because that's infinity. And then half of infinity, of course, is infinity. Okay, so you get the idea. The idea is that you look for the second right answer. But, and here's where I'm going to bring back fear of failure. You only do this. What were the consequences if you said something and I was like, what are you talking about? I don't get it. There were none, no consequences. Other than, I mean, people might have, kind of smiled and I don't understand that. But what does it matter? So the lesson to be learned is when you're trying to be creative, you should realize that the consequences of getting something wrong, whatever that means, are very small. And if you're trying to lead people to be creative, that means you have to make the consequences of being wrong very small. Another kind of game I do in class, and I'll just describe this. The point of this is if everybody in the room is trying to be creative, then there should be no fear of being wrong because everybody's in the same boat. So the game is, it's called Barnyard. And I hand out a slip of paper to everybody, or I did it virtually and I sent everybody a private email. And on the slip of paper is an instruction. And I tell people not to look at the slip of paper until I say go. But when I say go, everybody's going to open it up and do whatever it says. And then I ramp them up and I say, you got to really do it, really, really do it. And I get them going. Then I say go, everybody opens up the paper, and on the paper is an instruction that says something like, make a sound like a cow, make a sound like a chicken, make a sound like a dog. Okay, all these animals. And everyone all of a sudden starts doing this. And then they see everyone else doing it, and then they really get into it. But there's always an instant where people are looking at each other like, this is going to make me look dumb. But the purpose of this is everybody in the room is doing it. And if you're the only one not doing it, if you're the only one that is succumbing to your fear of looking dumb or whatever your voice of judgment is, then you're the one that's going to stand out. So as leaders trying to draw creativity, you have to try and establish that atmosphere where everybody's in the boat together. And we're all trying to do this. And we're all going to throw out these, we're all going to diverge and throw out these, what might be silly ideas or whatever. And if you can establish that, you'll get more buy-in. I actually did that. I was teaching this class at Rotterdam School of Management in the Netherlands. And when I do it, I really try to ramp people up to get ready to open up the paper and, moo like a cow and do all these things. So I'm standing on a desk and I'm counting down and I'm doing this whole thing. And I go, go. And everyone goes, moo, moo. And at that very moment, the director of the MBA program that I was teaching in walked by the room. And he stopped and looked in and was like, what's happening here? And we all laughed and I explained it to him. He got it. It was funny. But the point was, again, and he bought into this. If we're all in this boat together, there's no need to be fearful that you're going to look silly. And that's the game. Okay. So let me stop sharing here. Go back to my slides. All right. Okay. Let me pause here for just 1 second and see if anybody has any questions for me. We're going to do questions at the end as well, but any questions on anything I've done so far? All right. We'll just wait for the end, I guess. All right. So what I'm trying to get into here is recognizing the value of failure, not letting failure stop you from divergently thinking. That's one of the keys to creativity. There's some other keys that we can talk about if you want, but that's one of the keys to creativity. What we need to get to, what we're aspiring to, is understanding that failure is fine. We don't want to strive for failure. That's ridiculous. But failure is fine as long as it's smart failure. As long as it's smart failure. And the bullet point here is smart failure means that you learn from it. And there's whole books written about learning from failure. But so smart failure, these things happen in smart failure. You're driven by a clear aspiration. You know where you want to get to. You know what you want to have happen. And a failure to come up with how to make the light bulb, according to Thomas Edison, it doesn't stop you from getting there. It helps you get there as long as you keep going towards that goal. And as long as the outcome of the failure means something to you. So this is experimenting. So you do something, you learn from it, and that changes your next experiment. This is a very design thinking way of thinking. If you're not familiar with design thinking, again, there's lots of books on it that I could tell you about, but it's a really powerful way of thinking, and it's all the rage now. So design thinking, and design thinking means that you prototype and you test things, and you fail early and you fail often. That's one of the slogans of design thinking: fail early, fail often. But you do little failures and little experiments that all drive to the final end, which is where you're aspiring to. Your assumptions and hypotheses are clearly documented. So what that means is, if you fail, you'll know what went wrong. You're testing a hypothesis. We talked about consequences, so the cost is small. There's not a lot of consequential harm. So like I said in the half of 8 thing, if you're doing your taxes, half of 8 is 4. Don't be ridiculous. If you're when you drive home tonight, or most of you are probably already home, but when you're next time driving, don't decide to be creative and come up with the second right answer on which side of the road to drive on. Just go ahead. The right side of the road here in the US is the right side of the road. Stay on the right side of the road. But if consequences are low and you are trying to be creative, then start looking for the second right answer. And the best smart failure is you discuss in advance. Well, what happens if this doesn't work? What do we do then? What are we going to learn? And that allows you to smartly fail a lot faster and get back to it. So in the diverge converge slide that I had up, I forgot to press the button and it didn't say iterate. This should all be iterative. This should all be iterative. So you learn something, then you come back to it, and then you do it all again, and you keep going back and forth, and it should be fast. And also define what success is. So there's no way to know if you failed unless you know if you succeeded. So this is the best summary of smart failure that I've seen. And if you can have at least some of these bullets, I think you can fail pretty well. So, I'll just wrap up and then we'll move to questions. A smart guy I know who's very bald, and once gave a speech at baccalaureate at Bentley. And the point of the speech, the smart guy is me, in case you haven't figured that out. The point of the speech was if you don't fail, if you never fail, you aren't trying hard enough. And so failure is actually a key step to success. We talk in creativity about something called stepping stone ideas. And a stepping stone idea is something so crazy, so ridiculous, so infeasible that it'll never work. But it might lead to something that will work. So, all right. So that's all I have for you. And now I will open it up to questions, folks. Oh, Emily, did you want to kick something off here?
Yeah. Why don't we start with one of the pre-submitted questions? And if anyone in the audience has a question, you can feel free to follow my first question by unmuting yourself, or you can pop it into the chat. So our first question that was pre-submitted was, any particular tips for health professionals with private practices? That's an interesting question.
Okay. Let me just say at the outset here that I'm willing to fail at answering these questions. So I might not get exactly to it, but I think my tips for healthcare professionals, first, let me say healthcare professionals, that's one of those places where there's consequences of harm. So failing in some cases for healthcare people, that might not be the best place for creativity in some cases. Clearly, healthcare professionals have to be creative at some point to develop things like vaccines and different treatments and things like that. That has to happen. But at some point, you got to stop being creative and do what you're supposed to do. So let me be clear about that. But at the first part, when you're trying to be creative, I think my tips for healthcare professionals would be the same as for everyone. And that is, you have to establish an atmosphere where creativity is welcomed, where failure isn't going to be called out. And I talk a lot about this in class, but establishing an atmosphere of trust and safety. Trust and safety is key to group creativity. You know that the people around you are going to help you out. They're going to back you up. They're going to build you up. Rather than tear you down. So you have to establish that atmosphere of trust and safety. And I think the best way to do that is to be vulnerable as the leaders, is to be vulnerable yourself, to show that you're willing to fail, that you're willing to even laugh at yourself and have fun doing it. So the first thing we did in this workshop was I got up and I looked silly. So I'm willing to be silly, and you could be looking at me as the leader. I don't know if that's exactly true, but you can look at me as being the leader, and therefore I was willing to be vulnerable. And I think that vulnerability establishes that atmosphere. One other thing I'll say about this, so just real quickly, the reason I got into creativity is when I started learning, several years ago, I started taking improv comedy classes. And one of the things you learn in improv comedy classes is you got to let your scene partners in on it, and you got to trust them to pick you up. And there's this rule in improv comedy called build a brick, not a cathedral. And what that means is and in healthcare professionals, you can't think that you're going to be the one to come up with the ultimate solution. But you can be the one that comes up with the brick that leads to the ultimate solution. So in comedy, the point was, if you stand out off stage and you think you got to come out with the scene and have it all worked out in your head and know what all the laugh points are going to be and get it all down, A, that's incredibly intimidating. There's no way I'm ever getting out on stage. And B, that shuts everybody else out. So I think the point is, just go out on stage or just throw your idea out and start doing something. And whatever you're doing, your scene mates are going to come in and support you. Your coworkers are going to come in and support you, and you'll build up on that idea. So build a brick, build a piece, and let the group come up with the whole cathedral. I don't know if that answers specifically to healthcare, but I think that's my best advice to leading to creativity.
I don't think it was a failure in your
Okay,
response.
good.
We have several questions that are sort of related to the Bentley campus. So one is, do you use this design thinking on campus to solve real problems? And by
So,
you,
yeah.
maybe general faculty members, perhaps too, or you specifically, Andy, whichever you'd like to respond for.
This is a question near and dear to my heart. I'm also I'm the chair of the Faculty Senate, which is not nearly as sexy as it sounds, let me tell you. But we have undergone a 3.5 year, and it's still going on, curriculum revision for the core curriculum. So if you're an alum, you remember the GBs. Okay, we're redoing those, the whole core curriculum, and it's been a process, let me tell you. But we started out. I actually advocated when we first started hiring a firm like IDEO. And if you don't know the firm IDEO, you should look it up because it's incredible. And there's other firms like IDEO. IDEO is just kind of the most well-known to help us out with this. And we didn't do that because it was too expensive. But we stepped back and we did this. We started this design process with something called backward design, which is a very design thinking way of looking at it. And it's starting with where you want the objectives to be and then kind of working backwards to what you want to have happen. So yes, we did do parts of design thinking for the curriculum review. We've also done, this is getting way in the weeds about design thinking, but we're also in the middle, or we were right before COVID hit, of doing a journey map, which is another design thinking tool for students. Actually, I think it was students and alumni and families, I think. And it's a journey map of what are the experiences that and touch points people have from when they start thinking about coming to Bentley to, you know, when they donate a whole bunch of money to us later down the road. So we try. I also, design thinking is a very uncomfortable thing because it's not how most of us learned how to do things. And I'll let you in on a little secret. A lot of faculty can be very conservative. So we try, but it doesn't always happen.
Great. That actually answered another question that was posed. And this is this follow-up. How does Bentley make sure then that their graduates know how to use both sides of their brain, no matter their profession, whether they're on the more creative side of things or the more technical side of things?
This is being recorded, huh?
It is. You may need to follow up with Andy for these questions.
No, I'll answer. In my opinion, and I am very biased, so keep that in mind. In my opinion, Bentley and lots of other colleges are still stuck way too much on the convergent thinking side. I believe that. In my opinion, the divergent thinking side is what really separates us from the machines. It's what we do better than the computers do and will be able to do. So I think we ought to be doing more for the divergent thinking side. The good news is in this curriculum review, we managed to pass a learning objective about creativity and critical thinking and a bunch of other things, but creativity was in there. So I believe that we are going to start to see that pendulum swing more towards the divergent thinking, I think. I know I push for that as much as I can. The question asked, what do we do to ensure Bentley students do this? There's not a lot we can do to ensure it, except for requiring a creativity class. And we're not there yet. I hope to get there. I can't imagine anything that is more important. Again, though, I teach about creativity. So what else am I going to say? Obviously, I'm biased, but I think that's important. We moved in that direction. I don't know if any of you remember or were around, but we had a Bentley Mba program, which was a full-time cohort-based MBA program that was really cool. And we discontinued it 2 years ago. But in that program, we required students to take a creativity class. And I think that's heading in the right direction. So we'll see what we do with the new curriculum.
So all of you who don't have your master's degrees yet or want another one, come back to Bentley.
Yeah.
All right, let's start with another question. Do you have any tips for framing failures as feedback? You did speak about this to some degree, but I know that you're passionate about feedback. So
Yeah.
framing failures as
Feedback is so important. My biggest tip is to show people, or to talk. Another thing I say to students is, if you have an internship and you come back after the internship and you say, God, that was horrible. That was the worst thing I've ever been. I'm always going to be like, awesome, way to go. Because actually, let me get rid of this. Way to go. That's awesome, because that is excellent feedback. Framing as constructive feedback. There's a lot of writing on how to give constructive feedback. You sandwich things. Here's what you did well. Here's what you could do better. There's the latest thing is what I want to see more of and what I wish I saw. And those two ways of framing it allows people to give better feedback, because it's not saying, instead of saying, here's what you did wrong, it's, I wish I saw more of this. So that's another way of framing it. When we talk, again, I'm going to go to design thinking briefly, but in design thinking, one of the steps in design thinking is prototyping. So you get a prototype out there, and you don't wait until the prototype is almost perfect, because that's when you get bad feedback. You get the prototype out there ASAP when it's very rough, because if somebody shows you a product, this is my wife's glasses case, so shows you a product and says, what do you think of this? And it looks almost done. Most people are going to go, oh yeah, it's great. Yeah, it looks fine. But if it looks, really rough, then they're going to be way more willing to say, oh, well, why don't you do this to it? Why don't you change it this way? And in design thinking, the idea is you get them something in their hands so that they can manipulate it and really get into it, and then give you the feedback. And then the other thing I see when we teach this, students will say, all right, here's the prototype. And then the person that they're given the prototype will be like, well, I don't really like this. And then the student gets defensive. No, you just don't understand. This is the way it should be. Wrong. The idea is to get that feedback and not try to cut it off. Ooh, I get all excited about these things. Another thing we've done successfully is we have the students or the groups or whatever present their ideas. And then there's a question session afterwards, but the presenting students cannot talk. They can't defend, they can't explain, they can't do anything. All they can do is write notes on the feedback that they're getting. And that makes it much less defensive. The idea is then they take those notes, and then their next iteration, they improve based on those notes. That they're less defensive, and you'd be amazed at how frustrating the students get. It's frustrating the students feel. Frustrated the students feel, because they really want to jump in and say, no, you just misunderstand. Well, that's not the point. But then afterwards, when they improve upon whatever it is, it feels so much better, and the product or the project gets much better. So to kind of wrap that all up, how to frame constructive feedback is, the way you ask the questions and the way you react to the questions.
All right, I think we have time for one more question, Andy. This question is basically what spurred this session today was the book club. The Bentley Community Book Club is reading Failing Up by Leslie Odom Jr. So we reached out to our faculty expert, Andy, to host this session. And so we're definitely going to need your book list, Andy, to share with our book club. So again, our final question is how to overcome the barrier of failure to make something good from it. And you've sort of responded to that in a number of ways, but we'll let you take another take on it.
I think the biggest barrier to failure, I'll just speak for myself. The biggest barrier to my failure when I fail is, frankly, I feel crappy afterwards. If I fail at something, I mean, nobody likes to fail, and to say anything different would be ridiculous. And I feel crappy, and I kind of feel like, well, I'm not going to do that anymore then. I failed at this, I'm out. So I think to overcome that, you again have to have confidence in yourself that you can do something better. One of the biggest, most important personality traits for people that are creative is optimism. They have to believe, with no evidence at the beginning of their journey, of whatever they're trying to create, that at the end of that journey, something good is going to happen. You're going to come out of something with something good. So when I start, so kind of my big creative thing is developing classes. That's kind of my job. When I start developing a class, I don't have any idea what that class is going to look like afterwards when I'm done. And that blank piece of paper is scary because I don't know. And you have to let go of wanting to know what the ultimate end point is going to be. Because if you're trying to be creative, you don't know that ultimate end point. And to do that, you have to be optimistic that you'll be able to come up with something. This ties into, there's another question in the chat, and this ties in. It says that at the end of it is they don't know how to be creative. And that is absolutely true. And it comes back to my first thing about education and standardized testing. And I struggle with this with my students because they say, all right, so to get an A, what exactly do I have to do? Tell me exactly what to write. And I'm always like, well, if I tell you exactly what to write, then really I'm right. It's not really that good. And they have to have that confidence. And that confidence means optimism. So the coach that sees the player struggles with confidence. You have to try and instill that confidence and optimism that they can do it. And there is a good place at the end of this. I think that's probably one of the most important things to confidence. There's another book. This is actually my favorite book, though, as of now. It's by the founders of IDEO, Tom and David Kelly, and the name is Creative Confidence. And they think, and I agree, that the one basic building block of creativity is that optimism. So got to get that optimism. And the reason is if you don't think you can be creative, then you don't even try. And failure can kill that optimism. So this was a long-winded answer, but the long-winded answer is how do you get past that barrier is you have to instill that optimism that, wake up. So I failed today, go have a nap, have a glass of wine, wake up tomorrow and have the confidence that you'll be able to learn from the failure and get something better. I see Bethany's putting in all my books right there. That's good. I gotta have you in my classes.
Always good with all of those. Yeah. And we will definitely make sure to follow up with you, Andy, and get your book list to share with everyone. Hopefully everyone feels empowered to go out and be more creative.
Go out and fail, yay.
Yay, failure. Thank you so much, Andy. We really appreciate your presentation today, and the activity at the beginning was certainly a joy for our afternoon. So please join us again, and we'll follow up with an email. You can reach out to Andy directly. Andy, any parting words?
I honestly, I just want to say thank you because this has been the highlight of my week. I love doing these workshops, so it was fun. This and walking on the warning track at Fenway Park for Bentley's graduation. Those two things were the highlight of my week. So thank you.
Wow, that we can even compete with that. That's great. Okay, good. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. See you again soon.
Hey, Richie, I just saw Richie's here. Or Rich, sorry, I should be more professional. We play basketball together, so I can call him Richie.
Oh, good.
All right.
Yeah.
Everybody, see you later.